Okay, so I want to talk about a few things that um, have come up and may or may not be a source of confusion. So, with regard to the midterm grades and progress reports, so um, I basically, well, no basic about it. It's what I did. I only took into account the first 8 weeks. Okay, so the first half of the semester. So if you got an A on your progress report, for example, or in your midterm grade, but you haven't turned anything in since week 8, that score is not accurate. Now, having said that, uh, the midterm grades and progress reports really don't mean anything in the long term, um, in the sense that those are not, your final grades. Obviously, there's a entire 8 week period that's not figured in there. I am willing to extend the submission of late work another week in light of the progress reports just coming out. So to give you an opportunity for individuals who haven't had an opportunity, or haven't turned in, been able to, for whatever reason, turn in the late material yet, I will extend that offer for another week. Um, and so if there's anything that you haven't submitted from the beginning of the semester, you may submit that for late credit. Now, with regard to, and this is something that has been coming up frequently, with regards to the reflections, they must be a minimum of 2 pages for you to get the full credit. Okay, not 1 1/4, not 1 1/2. They need to be 2 pages. All right. That's the purpose of me, putting the prompts on there, is to, provide you with some kind of catalyst for you to write about. The implication is that if you can't come up with at least 2 pages of reflection, you haven't really been engaging that much in the course um, for that particular week. And even if you hadn't been, you can certainly reflect on other things going on in your life to hit that 2 page mark to still get that credit. So again, with the reflections, bare minimum 2 pages on those. Um, Let me back up a little bit. Uh, the grades are not numerical. Okay, the grades are symbolic. All right, meaning that if you see a 5 in Blackboard, that is not the number 5 to be summed into something. That represents the complete state of that particular assignment. Okay, just like if you see a 2, that means that its term was turned in late. All right, or a 3, that means it was incomplete, and so on. Right, these are not numbers to be summed. Okay, for a total. Okay. Um, but again, I have to emphasize, and I apologize to the two of you who were on here because this probably doesn't even apply to you, but you've got to turn in your work on time every week. That's the key to this class. I have folks, who have perfect scores, right? Because that's exactly what they do, right? Um, each assignment, for example, like the which I haven't scored yet, but the final drafts of the narrative, right? That specifically said you specifically had a page count on it, and it specifically said you had to highlight your changes, right? Those are the only 2 explicit requirements for a complete on that. Okay, so if you met that requirement, you get a complete on it. It's as simple as that, right? Um, Now, moving forward to the profile. So a couple of questions. Let me address a couple of questions that I received and did answer individually over the past week with regard to the profile. The profile, if you've been following these discussions, and if you watched my video introducing the profile project last week, then you understand that the profile project is investigative. In other words, you're going to come up with some question that you want the answer to, right? Or a perspective that you are interested in, right? For example, if you had a relative or a friend who witnessed a particular historical event, right? For example, maybe somebody was present in New York City when the Twin Towers fell. That's one example. I knew people who were there like the same week, right? Or things like that. So or even in more general terms, I mean, just to use that as an example, you could talk to somebody who's like, well, what was the impact of that? Even in more general terms, even if they weren't there, what was the impact on somebody's everyday life or something like that. The Twin Tower, that's just one example, right? But something that you want perspective about. It could be an object, right? It could be an object in your family that's, like an heirloom, and you don't know necessarily the full story behind it. Again, if you look at my sample essays, one of the best done profiles is a young woman talking to her uncle about his paintings, right? And getting the story, right? The sort of full perspective on why he paints, what he paints about, and so on and so forth. And it's really, really great, what she uncovers and what she writes about. So if there's something like that, and of course you can include if you're talking about a painting or something that's in your family, you can include a photo, right? Or a piece of jewelry, or a spiritual artifact, or something of that nature, right? A lot of people have, for example, rosaries that belong to their great grandmother, or something to that effect, or maybe you have a mezuzah that's been in your family for generation to generation. Maybe your family has murtis that have been passed down, and so on and so forth, right? Not privileging one religious tradition over another in my examples. So the point being is that every family, every person, has stories, right? A lot of I've had several students write about their parents' immigration to the United States, right? And the hardships that they endured to do so. You know, which is a very it's very significant, right? I mean, my own father, okay, came to the United States at the age of 5, right? Obviously he didn't have much memory of that. His older brother did, and I talked to his older brother about it because his older brother was 12, when they came over. So from Germany in 1948. Uh, you know, so that conversation then becomes very significant, and through something like that, you can gain a bit of perspective, which is what this project is about. Now, the caveat is, if you are in the learning community, right, with Professor Vega, if you are dual enrolled, not dual enrolled high school, right, that's different, okay, but if you're in the learning community in that section, then you have to it has to be career oriented. Now, the way in which you make it career oriented, that's open ended, right? So long as it relates to a particular career field that you want to pursue, right? And you also need to cite 3 sources, right, in that piece. Now, to do that, to accomplish that, for those of you who need to cite the sources, right, to meet that requirement, I would, in addition to the sort of outline that I give you in the assignment sheet, right, in the video, right, where I talk about basically how to plot out your profile, right? I would also include, before you essentially begin the discussion of the person you're profiling, etc., I would include probably a page or page and a half additional material giving background information on the career field, etc., so that you can meet that requirement. And then that piece then becomes the profile in total, including the material that you're citing, if you were in the learning communities class, then becomes the subject of your final presentation for Professor Vega's class, right? So if you're not in the learning communities class, and those of you who are not received an announcement email stating that you are not, right? But for those of you who are not, you don't have to worry about that, right? As far as I'm concerned, you can do your profile on anything that you like, so long as it is significant to you, right? You know, it has to mean something to you. You have to have a stake in it, right? Because if you don't have a stake in it, it's not going to be interesting, right? It's not going to be interesting. So think about it. Think about questions that you may have, and to whom in your life you can go for answers to those questions, right? So another question that I have received over the past week or so is about whether or not the interview can be conducted in Spanish, and the answer is yes. Of course, you can do that. Obviously, and you were not, as I've said before, and as I believe I say in the assignment sheet, you are not quoting the entirety of the interview. You're only quoting those portions, right, that are of deep significance to, with regard to what you're investigating or what you're discovering, right? So in those instances, right, you would translate those particular instances, those particular snippets of the interview, right? You would translate those into English for the benefit of your English reading audience, right? But yes, you may conduct the interview in Spanish. I would mention in the profile that you are conducting the interview in Spanish, you know. So there's that. As I mentioned before, you can, and in fact, I encourage you to include photographs and so forth. Now, if you include a photograph is like any other piece of evidence. You can't just stick a photograph randomly, you know, into an essay. You've got to use the photograph like a piece of evidence. In other words, you present the photograph, and then you, in the body of your text, refer to that photograph and talk about the importance of what's going on in that photograph relative to what you are talking about in that particular section of the essay. Okay. So that leads me to the next point that I was going to talk about, is the integration of sources. Now, even if you are not required to do the citation of the 3 sources, you are still delving into the integration of sources here, but your source that you're integrating is the interview itself, right? You're taking pieces of the interview itself and you're integrating it either by quoting directly from it, paraphrasing from it, etc., right? in any case, you can't, the idea is that in integrating a source, what you are doing is you are using that source to make a point, right? And it is incumbent upon you as the essayist, right, to communicate the relationship between that particular piece of evidence and the point you're trying to make, right? If you don't do that, the in essence the evidence is kind of useless, right? If you integrate any, and this is generally the case throughout any and all courses that you will take, right? If you integrate a piece of evidence, whether you are paraphrasing, summarizing, or quoting directly, you need to talk about the relationship between the evidence and the point that you are trying to make. This is an essential piece. This is an essential point. If you don't learn anything else this semester from me, learn this. Okay? Learn this point. This is where your genius, if you will, your uniqueness comes in, is in how you articulate the relationship between the evidence and the point. Okay. So think about that. And I've got for you a number of resources that I put in this week's videos and readings folder. The one that I really want you to pay attention to and really spend some time with, and I even mention it specifically in the prompts for the reflection this week, is the annoying ways. It's an essay, right? The annoying ways that students use quotes or use sources, right? I would like you to read that essay, okay? And I would like you to actually reflect on it in your reflection, right? Or rather, that's one of the options that you have, is to reflect on that, okay? But I really think that you will get a lot out of that essay, because it sort of talks about various snafus that student writers make and how to fix them, right? It gives you practical advice as to how to fix them, right? Secondly, and I mentioned this last week as well, in the assignment sheet to the profile project, there are a number of invention exercises there. I recommend that you actually engage in those invention exercises and use that as a catalyst to write about in your reflection. So, and it'll also give you a sense of what goes into creating this profile, and kind of what you need to be thinking about in doing it. The other element, if you haven't done so already, is to read the sample essays that are in the videos and readings from last week, right? Week 10. There's 5 sample profiles, as well as 5 videos where I talk over the essay and explain it. And or rather, I shouldn't say explain it, but give my perspective on the particular essay, right? I think if you look at those 5 essays, if you look at the assignment sheet carefully, watch my video on the assignment sheet, look at those essays, right? I think you'll have a really strong sense of how to go about doing this profile. It really isn't difficult if you follow kind of And as I emphasize, right, in the videos, right, you don't necessarily have to follow my format verbatim. That the format that I give on the assignment sheet is kind of a cheat sheet, if you will, right? It's you know, but if you want to do something different, as long as it fulfills the requirements, as long as it's an investigation um, um, for which you are using an interview with an individual, you can change it up. You can, however you want to do it. I am not requiring you to do a transcription for this. For one, we're sort of short on time, and two, most of you will be doing your. I'm assuming a lot of you will be doing your interviews via Zoom or something of that nature, right? And so you can record those, and so there's no need to do a transcription. Okay. Um, Trying to think if there's anything else. Um, so for those of you who are in Professor Vega's class or are in the learning community, I also included them in both courses, but they're primarily there for the people in the learning community. I included a step-by-step instruction sheet on how to access and use the library databases, and I included a video on basically taking you through that process and on talking a little bit more in depth about integrating sources. I did include my own sort of summary on integrating sources that is useful whether you are using the scholarly sources or not. Right, so it talks about signal phrasing, talks about running acknowledgement, talks about basically the sort of nuances, if you will, of integrating sources. I would look at that piece. I would prioritize the piece on what, as I said, I would prioritize the piece on the annoying ways that students use sources. And then from there, I would prioritize the integration of sources piece, and then the video associated with that as well, if you get to that. But there is a resource there for navigating the databases specifically, and with pictures and so on and so forth. And then I have a link to the Purdue OWL website. And I've probably mentioned Purdue OWL before. It is the foremost free resource for writing that's available, really. I've used it probably for 15 years easily. And it's constantly updated, and it's just got a lot of material all the way from source integration to citation to all this kind of stuff. Different concerns of different genres of writing, different audiences, all that stuff is available for free on the Purdue OWL website from obviously Purdue University, right? So anyway, I put a link to that. But as far as what I'm asking you to do this week, again, prioritize that essay. If you have not set up your interview, please do that. Okay. And from there, just begin to draft your profile. And again, engage with those invention exercises, because those are going to get you to be thinking about uh, the nature of this profile. right? And sort of the component parts that you need for the profile. Um, but a lot of that's predicated on actually doing the interview. So that's got to be your your sort of first priority, if you will, is locating, first of all, figuring out what it is you want to investigate, and secondly, you know, locating that individual, right? Um, Trying to think if I'm leaving anything out that I should be talking about today. Any questions? Anything in the chat? Nope. Okay, I'm trying to think here if I am missing something. Okay, I know once I pop off of here, I'm gonna think of something that I should have told you, but any case, sorry. Um, all right. So I'm not going to keep you all on here just for the sake of keeping you all on here. Um, I'll, oh wait, would you okay, hold on. Let me read what's in the chat real quick. When would you recommend having the interview done by? Frankly, that's a great question. And what I was sort of implying in my statement a couple minutes ago was that ideally, you probably want your interview done by the end of the week. Okay. If not this week, then certainly next week, because the first draft of it's due the week after, and you really need to give yourself um, some cushion, right, to be able to write something nice, right? So, especially right, especially for the individuals who need to cite those extra sources, right? I would really try to get the interview in by the end of this week, um, if at all possible. Um, and obviously, you know, this is COVID era, so everything is, who knows what, you know. I actually, this is kind of off the subject and yet not. I discovered that 3 of my close friends in Dallas actually have COVID. Um, and the irony, actually the quite the frightening irony is that these people are extremely cautious, almost fanatical about, you know, masks and distancing and all of that. But they live in a kind of a insular community, like an insular neighborhood, in a certain part of Dallas. And so if one person in that neighborhood gets it, you know, everybody else is likely to get it, you know. So it's it's real. I mean, it's out there, you know. So be careful. Uh, do vote. I believe, yes, you have until, I believe, Saturday to early vote. Early voting is much, much better than trying to vote on November 3rd. If you're on campus, the early voting is at Palo Alto. So, you know, um, hop in the car with a buddy or something and go to Palo Alto and early vote. It only took me about 15 minutes. So, you know, and I always say, if you don't participate in the process, you can't complain. And so at the very least, you know, participate in the process so you can complain for the next 4 years, right? Anyway, so I think that's all for today. I can't really think of anything else unless you all have any questions. Again, um, I really think that, and this is, and I'm emphasizing this, reiterating this for the people who will be watching the video, is more so probably than for you who are actually on here, because I think the for you who are on here, most of y'all come to basically on just about every one of these, so I think you're pretty much on track. But if you look in the week 10 folder, last week's folder, and you look at that video that goes over the profile project assignment sheet, and you read through those sample essays and watch those little videos for each sample essay, I really think that you'll have a strong understanding about what this project's about. Okay. All right. I'm not going to keep you any longer because you have better things to do with your time. Have a wonderful day. Be safe. Take care of yourself.